I have a question. Um, are you going to cover about how feasible it is to relocate in this country you're interested in? I mean, or like the different countries you listed on the chart show how many numbers have moved to the
Yeah.
the UK and Canada and Mexico and places. And I was just hearing things about it not being that easy to move to places like Canada and the UK, etc.
Yeah, it's actually becoming more difficult every day. And I probably won't talk about particular countries, but I will talk about what you need to do to find out
Okay.
about a particular country.
Oh, good.
The problem is there's so many places people want to move to. One of the places, the areas that wasn't mentioned there was Southeast Asia. It's becoming very popular. And they're, depending on the country, it can be quite easy and or fairly difficult to make that happen. So, but I will talk about what you need to do in order to make that happen. So that's what this evening is about.
Oh,
So,
that's great.
okay, well, I'm going to get started. We've reached 31 out of 50, and we didn't get to 50 last week. So we'll assume that not everybody's coming. So what I want to talk about tonight is what goes into the planning. What do you need to do in order to be prepared to plan your move? This is less about the planning it itself. That's what next week is about. This is what you need to think about as you try to make decisions about where you might move and that sort of thing. So one of the things I want to point out is we all have a view of the world. This is actually referred to typically as a paradigm. It's a framework or theoretical framework of how things work. For instance, when my wife and I said we were moving to Eastern Europe, one question we almost universally got, and it was the first question for people who had other questions, was what are you going to do about healthcare? Now, that reflects on us because I think they thought we were old and would need healthcare. But anyway, the problem is that people have this paradigm that healthcare in the US is brilliant and healthcare elsewhere is just really terrible. If you're going to move to a country outside the US, you need to have the idea that things there are going to be okay. And if you go there thinking, well, it all should be just like the US, you're going to be, the term disappointed comes to mind. I'm not sure that's the word. Frustrated might be a better one. Things are not going to be comfortable for you. We've realized in being here 7 months and watching Facebook posts and that sort of thing over the course of several years that the people who are most happy in a move of this sort are the ones who see different as just different, not better or worse. Now, some things, of course, will be better and some will be a bit worse. But if you evaluate everything against a standard of this is the way they did it in the US and it's the way it should be done, you're going to find frustration in that. You really need to have an open mind of, they do it differently here, but this is here and I'm in a different place. What we hear a lot here is there's so much bureaucracy and so hard to get through the bureaucracy. And of course there is. But the same is true in the US. It's just the bureaucracy you're familiar with. If you're going to be immigrating, you're also an immigrant. You're leaving someplace behind. You need to realize you're not just going somewhere, but you're also leaving. You need to plan for that leaving. You need to plan for how you're going to say goodbye to folks, for instance, how you're going to say goodbye to your stuff that you're not taking with you. You also need to plan for arriving. What's it going to be like when you get there, and how can you make the arrival as smooth as possible? This is the sort of thing I want to talk about tonight. So we're going to open with, what do you tell your friends? Some people open with, I need to leave the US. I'm not happy here. Things aren't suiting me. That could be a problem. Some open with, I want to live more cheaply. That's probably a problem too. We actually know several people here who are really just looking for a cheap place to live. And the problem with moving to the cheapest place, which Bulgaria counts, it's a pretty low cost place to live. is, for one thing, as prices go up, you get annoyed because they weren't supposed to. And for another, you're missing out on an awful lot of other things that could be a problem with focusing on just one slight advantage.
And can I throw something in
Yes.
here real quick, just on the living more cheaply? One of the misconceptions also, and of course I can only speak to Mexico, is yes, the cost of living is cheaper, but the financial requirements to get in, to get residency, are extremely high. And maybe we'll talk more about that later, but there needs to be some realism there too, that you know, folks think, oh, okay, I'm going to go live cheaply, but yeah, what does it take to get there?
Yeah, it to get there, the way you structured that sentence is an important one too, because it takes a lot of money to arrange to get there, to pay up front. It also costs to move. And so, I mean, this is not going to be cheap. It's going to cost you some effort. But as I said last week, this is about the adventure. This is the excitement of the move. And you need to address it as though it's going to be a great adventure and a whole lot of fun. And it's also going to be a challenge. And the challenge is a good part of it. That's where things make the effort worth the while. The other thing you need to talk with your friends about is that it isn't likely to be forever. Even if it is, even if you think you're moving forever, your friends don't want to hear that. Your family doesn't want to think you're never coming back. They want to think you're going on a short adventure. Maybe it's going to be 10 months. Maybe it's going to be 10 years. We actually told folks we kind of anticipate maybe being here 10 years. Part of that's age, because I'll be nearly 80 10 years from now. And I think maybe I want to be back in the US. That has become less an issue since I moved here and have become more comfortable with dealing with healthcare, dealing with the bureaucracy of immigration and that sort of thing. So now I'm even telling close friends, chances are this is an immigration effort. We're here probably forever. One thing I'll warn you about, I had a friend, a coworker with me at the Oregon Department of Education, whose father-in-law had moved to Italy. And he aged in Italy. He was living in a small village in Italy and ended up, in fact, in an adult foster care system. And he was doing quite well until he started to have some problems with declining cognitive effort. He was not as clear as he had been. And interestingly, Italian had been his most recent language. So he began to lose his Italian. So he couldn't speak Italian with the local caregivers, for instance. The problem was the family didn't speak Italian at all. And that meant there was no way of communicating with him or with the caregivers. It had been they would call and talk to him and he would communicate with the caregivers in Italian. So there is a concern over your ongoing health and any possible decline. So be aware that it may not be forever, even if you intend that it is.
Okay.
I do want to define some terms, and I've used them and I talked about them last week, but I want to make them a lot more clear. Immigrants move to a new country politically distinct from their own. So if you move from Iowa to Oregon, that's not immigration. That's internal relocation. I happen to have done that. That's why that's the example I give. Actually, I was living in Illinois. But anyway, if you move from the Midwest to the West Coast, that's not immigration. You're moving to a new country. And it's very important you realize it's a new country. Things are going to be different there, not just the language. There are differences in how people view things. I had a friend in college who was from Canada, and nothing is much more similar to the US than Canada. And yet she went to register her car at a point, which she, by the way, was not allowed to do, it turned out. But it took her about 3 hours of talking to an insurance agent about that, because in Canada, you register your car at your insurance agents. You don't go to the Department of Motor Vehicles, you go and buy insurance and the insurance agent registers your car. And they talked past each other for about 3 hours because they couldn't figure out what the other one was talking about. But as I say, in fact, Canada is so similar to the US, the International Student Office wouldn't talk with her because they said, you're not an international student, you're from Canada. So it's a different country. Immigrants plan to never return to their own country, the country in which they were born. They may seek citizenship, but maybe not. And in fact, my wife and I probably will not seek citizenship here in Bulgaria. You have to wait, you have to be present for 10 years, you have to do a whole bunch of different things, and all it gets us is voting. And we're not that interested in trying to understand the politics of Bulgaria well enough to vote. By the way, we do still get to vote in the US. If you leave the US, you're allowed to continue to vote there. Expats, which is what nearly everyone refers to themselves as, even though most people are immigrants. But expats move to a new country, politically distinct from their own, just as immigrants do. But typically they're on assignment by an employer or they're there for some particular amount of time. So for instance, members of the Church of Latter-day Saints who are on their mission would truly be expats. They're there for a year or two. Those serving with the US State Department are expats because they're on assignment for a time. We actually met our first real expat here about 2 weeks ago, and he's here working for a company that teaches English. He's actually German, but so he teaches English and German, I believe, but he's only here for 4 years. That's the extent of the assignment. But that's a rare thing. Most people actually have moved here anticipating being here a very long time, and certainly with no particular end date. But an expat has a trigger that's going to take them back to their home country. There is a point at which they will not be living in the new country, and they know when that is, or at least what will happen that makes that happen. They're not interested in citizenship, but merely long-term residency. And by the way, long-term may sound longer than it really is. In most countries, if you stay more than 90 days, you're a long-term resident. So we're not talking long-term in terms of 5 or 6 years, but rather just longer than you're allowed to stay without getting a visa. There's a new class of people called digital nomads. These are typically fully remote workers. This can include people who write travel blogs and that sort of thing, but they can also be people like Laura, who works from home all the time. She can't leave the country though, because she works for the state of Oregon. But anyway, these are people who are fully remote very often, and they continue to work, but they can work from anywhere. So they head out. They go to wherever they think might be fun and interesting right now. They bring their income with them rather than burden the local economy, and that's a critical element. Most countries don't want you to come there and get a job because we hear all the time immigrants are taking our jobs. That's not what countries want. But if you bring your money to them and start spending there, they're pretty happy about that. That's why retirees are so popular as immigrants into countries, because retirees come, bring their pensions, and spend money, but they don't cost the economy. Digital nomads can typically stay longer than just a typical visa. They're typically allowed to stay 6 months to as much as 24, depending on the country. And many of the countries are now expanding this to include much longer stays than just 6 months, which was initially what people were focused on. They're up to 24 months in many countries now, but you have to prove that you've got the money to support yourself while you're there. People in this condition, people who are calling themselves digital nomads, usually are moving around just for the adventure. It is possible, though, that you could say, I don't want to live in the United States anymore. I want to live somewhere else, but I can't get a visa that will allow me to stay forever. So I'm just going to hop from one country to another every time my long-term stay fails, every time I run out of the opportunity to stay. That's exactly what slow travelers do. Slow travelers have no interest in citizenship or long-term stay. They're just out for the travel. They move from one country to another on a frequent basis, usually several weeks, sometimes as long as several months. But it's not like the traveler who just goes to Europe for 3 weeks. It's somebody who goes to Europe, stays in France for 4 weeks, and then moves to Spain for a couple of weeks, and then tries Italy. And at about that point, they have to leave because you can only stay 90 days in most of Europe before you have to leave the Schengen zone. I'll talk more about the Schengen zone. Slow travelers often move from one place to another place because they just can't stay any longer. We actually met someone here in Bulgaria who wasn't able to get her visa. And this gets back to what Laura was saying about having to have enough money to essentially, it's not to buy your way in, it's to prove your viability as a resident. You have to be able to show money in the bank. You don't have to pay the country. You just have to prove you have enough income and money. Well, we met someone who wasn't able to do that. And she was living in Bulgaria for several weeks and moved from here to Albania. Albania lets you stay for a year on a US passport, no visa. So she's over in Albania right now trying to figure out how to pull things together to show the Bulgarian government that she has the resources she needs to live. And that means she can convince them to let her move back here and stay on a long-term basis, 1 year at a time. Actually, at this point, I'm going to ask, are there any questions about this? Do these situations make sense to folks? And are you at all curious about what might?
Jan, there's a question in the chat from Lynn.
Yeah. There is, and it's so small I can't read it. Can you?
I'll read it to you then. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can you return to a country after being away a certain amount of time? For example, 90 days in France, 1 month in England. Can one return to France?
Yes. And in fact, those are very good examples because no, I'm sorry, it's not anymore. Even with Brexit, England remains in the Schengen zone. So the Schengen zone includes, I believe the number is 23 countries. It changes occasionally. And in fact, Bulgaria just joined last January, so not quite a year ago now. If you're in the Schengen zone, 23 countries in Europe, it does not, by the way, match the European Union. It's a separate treaty. If you're in the Schengen zone, you can stay 90 days out of 180. And then you have to leave. And you can't come back until 90 days later. So if you stay for 2 months in France and go to London then for a month, you have to leave the Schengen zone and stay away for at least 90 days. Interestingly, if you go to France for 2 weeks, then Italy for 2 weeks, and then leave, go home, you've still got a month's worth of expense on the 90 days and 180. So if you come back 2 months later, you've already spent a month in the Schengen. This gets very confusing. And I don't want to get too deep into it, but you can go to Albania. They're not in the Schengen zone. You can go to Turkey. They're not in the Schengen zone. You can leave Europe altogether and get out of the Schengen zone. But you have to make certain that you don't overstay your visa or you can't come back in. But yeah, that's exactly what people do is they spend some time inside one country, and when their time starts to run out, then they move to another country and stay. In fact, some people were claiming, and I think this is a dangerous thing to try, you could leave for the day and come back and start the clock again. That's really risky. And in fact, I've known people who stayed as long or as little as 12 to 14 hours extra, and it was the next day, and they were tagged for it when they tried to leave the country. So you have to be really careful to watch these things. Yes.
Yeah, There's another question related to that, and then we'll come back to Eileen. Claudia asked, with your 180-day visa, can you stay more than 90 consecutive days in Bulgaria? What do you do when the 180 days expire?
Yeah. Let me get into that a little bit later. I want to talk more about what the visa requirements are. In fact, the next thing to talk about is what is a visa. So I want to talk about some of those things, and so I want to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about, and then we'll get to how you can manage it. So, was there another question?
Yeah, one more. Did you bring all your money with you except security?
No, we didn't bring any money with us that we didn't have to. We have accounts in the U.S. and we continue to maintain those accounts in the U.S. and we transfer funds when we need them. We have only living expense money in Bulgaria. There's no reason for the Bulgarian government to know how rich I am or how poor I am, as long as they know I have enough. So that's what I had to do, was I transferred some money here, and we'll talk about amount. But I transferred some money here when we moved in order to get a more extended stay. So,
and just
yeah.
As well, just understand that in most countries, your debit card will still work there, or your credit card. So you don't have to have cash with you. In some countries and in some reasons, you may want to have cash, but your debit and credit cards are going to work exactly the same there as they do here.
Yeah, it's actually in Bulgaria, we very rarely see a cash only opportunity. Everything's got, I mean, credit cards are everywhere, even in smaller villages. They're accepting credit cards for most things. Occasionally, a restaurant will say cash only, but I think in Plovdiv, we may have gone to 2 of those out of, I don't know, 150, 300 that we visited so far since we got here. We eat out a lot. So let me talk a bit about some other terms you really ought to know. A visa is a document that authorizes you to visit a country. If you want to go to most countries, you in fact don't need a visa for any kind of extended stay or for any kind of short stay. The US passport is pretty powerful to get you into countries, sometimes as little as 30 days, more typically 90 days. As I said, Albania takes your US passport for a year without you doing anything more than showing your passport on the way in. They do track it, and they'll tell you they won't tell you when the year's up. They'll tell you if you overstay that year when you try to leave. By the way, visas are available from, if you happen to need one, you want to stay longer than just the amount of time you can stay on your passport. You can get them through consulates or embassies. Embassies are the official contact for the country outside the US. Consulates are offices that just provide services both to citizens of the other country and to citizens of the US, in our case, who want to visit that country. Consulates are distributed. So I know that for Bulgaria, there's an embassy in there's an embassy in Washington, D.C. There are consulates in New York City, Los Angeles, and Chicago. So not very many, and you have to travel to visit them. Laura, you said that Mexico has a lot more, right?
Yeah, I don't know how many there are here in the United States, but there are a lot. I could look at it, but I mean, there's probably 20 or 30, something like that.
The countries set up the number of consulates they need in order to serve their citizens who live in the US. So there aren't so many Bulgarians, so there aren't so many consuls. But that's where you would go to manage a visa. By the way, that indicates there are quite a number of Mexicans, and that's not a surprise to anyone, I'm sure.
Can I, real quick, as far as the visas,
Right.
I just want to say, I don't know obviously how it is in all countries, but for Mexico, you can go on a tourist visa for up to 180 days without having to have residency. However, it is up to the immigration officer when you go through and enter the country, how long they will give you. So if you're going on vacation and you tell them you're going to be there, say for 10 days, they're probably going to give you at least 10 days. But don't count, if you're going longer than that, don't count on getting 180 days because they may say you've got 2 weeks and it's up to them.
That's not pleasant. But residency is an authorization to live long-term in a country without citizenship. So for instance, Amy and I came here on a 6-month visa, and we immediately applied for long-term residency, which is 1 year. We hadn't been here but about 3 weeks when we started working on our residency. That's how you get to stay long-term. But most countries are like Bulgaria. You get a visa to get into the country, and then you apply locally within the country. This is where checking on how things work is really important, because some countries you would get in with your visa, and then when you apply for residence, they say, no, I don't think so. Well, if you've already sold all your stuff or moved all your stuff, that makes for a kind of an uncomfortable situation. So you need to be careful to determine how likely it is that you would get residency. In Bulgaria, almost anybody who is retired and can acquire the visa D, it's referred to as. There are a number of categories, and the D category is for retirees. Anybody who can get a visa D is very likely to get residency. We've not heard of anybody who's been denied residency, although we have heard people getting denied their initial visa, which is a better situation. It'd be much nicer to have that visa denied than it would be to find you don't get residency once you get to the country. Next up is citizenship. That's a legal status that allows ongoing residency forever. You're a citizen, you don't have to leave. It gets access to social services, to voting, to that sort of thing. Yeah, my wife points out, Amy says to me, you keep your American status. And in fact, the US doesn't care if you have dual citizenship. You can have citizenship in your gaining country and retain the US citizenship. Indeed, the US government does not want you to give up US citizenship. They make it inconvenient at least, and they make it quite costly. Most recent we saw was they insist you give up 40% of your total wealth as a tax, because they continue to tax you while you're living overseas, and they don't want to lose the taxes. So they're willing to do that. The government of the US is willing to do that if you give them 40% of your total wealth. This term is really important. It's apostille, not apostle. We often see people saying they're getting their documents apostilled, and very often people will respond with something about Christ or the Bible. Apostille is a lot like notary, but it's done internationally. So you would have to get documents notarized, and then you have to send them to someone else to get them apostilled, and usually you have to have them translated as well for the apostille. What this does is it says the document is a true and original, or true and accurate copy of the original. It is what it claims to be, and by apostilling it, it convinces the foreign government of that. This is true in almost all cases for almost all countries you might go to that you would need to have an apostille. I'm not going to go much further with that information, but I will tell you it's easy enough to find online. But for instance, to move to Bulgaria, we had to get in touch with the FBI and get our FBI records to show whether or not we had committed terrible crimes. Fortunately, Amy and I both have clean records, so clean, in fact, that they have no record of us. But they do give you a letter saying there's no record of legal proceedings against this person. That takes about 2 hours. It's amazing. You go to the post office, get fingerprinted, and drive home, and by the time you're home, you may well have that document. But it's worthless to you unless you get it apostilled. And that takes a couple of weeks, and you can do it directly online as you request the document. So all of that's available, and you can look it up.
Jan, there's a question. At what point do you not have to pay US income tax? And I'm going to actually post what I just found on it You can answer it if you want, but otherwise I'm going to post in the chat an answer.
Well, let's see if my answer is correct.
Okay.
Never. There is never a chance until you surrender your U.S. citizenship, you will be paying income tax. And by the way, the U.S. is one of the very few countries that does that if you live outside the country. What does your document say?
Yes, and that is true unless you renounce your citizenship. However, there are several ways to kind of get out of paying it. There's the foreign earned income exclusion. If you're making money in the country that you're living in, you can make, as of 2025, you can make up to $130,000 in foreign earned income without paying U.S. taxes on it. There's also a foreign tax credit. Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say that doesn't mean if you're being paid your pension in the other country, the pension, Social Security, any of that is earned within the United States and is therefore taxable. And the credit, you're exactly right. If Bulgaria were to charge me, say, 10% of all my pensions, that's a credit on my US taxes. I don't have to pay that. Interestingly, Bulgaria doesn't charge taxes on pensions, so I have to pay the full amount in the US.
So yeah, really all of this is based on whether or not you're making money in the country you're living in. If you're not making money and you just have income here in the United States, you're going to pay taxes on it forever.
Yeah. Okay, so what if I leave the US? What about it? What happens to the US? I'm pretty sure the US is going to do whatever it does without you. Although, one thing I'll warn you is you will have friends who say you have no right to say anything about what goes on in the US, you left. We've already had that experience, and in fact, just yesterday, Amy was talking with someone we know who moved to Australia quite a number of years ago. And when she complains about something going on in the US, she gets messages back from people saying, you have no right. You moved to Australia, you live there now, shut up about the US. So be prepared to take that. US citizenship is retained, as are your tax and voting statuses. Voting is not convenient, but it is possible. Before we left, talked with the Jackson County clerk who manages voting in Jackson County, and we're told we can fax in, yesterday's news, we can fax in our ballots. I'm not really sure how accepted that will be in the future. It'll be very interesting to see how international voting is managed. But you are still eligible to vote, even in local elections, of wherever your residency is. As I said, any foreign taxes are credited, so you don't have to pay tax on money you already paid tax on in the gaining country. And as I said, U.S. allows dual citizenship. You can be a citizen of the U.S. and any other country on earth. There's some stuff in the Constitution about that, but for instance, you can't take a knighthood. If you move to the UK, you can't become a knight because knighted people are part of they swear an oath to a potentate or some silly thing like that that's in the Constitution. But what about Social Security? Nobody probably cares about this, so I'm going to skip this slide. You will continue to receive Social Security as is normal. For right now, the U.S. government continues to pay your Social Security, and last I saw, about 720,000 Social Security recipients are living outside the U.S.
How many?
Go ahead.
Could you say that number again? How many are living outside the U.S.?
The last I saw, I believe the number was 720,000. And I believe the Social Security Administration doesn't know about all of us, because many of us maintain physical mailing addresses inside the U.S. and with direct deposit into a U.S. bank. I'm not sure how they would know you're living outside the U.S. So. Speaking of direct deposit, it really is most secure to have direct deposit. We really, really don't like having to rely on mail getting to us here. It can easily take 6 weeks for mail to get here if it arrives at all. So we're not interested in putting money through the mail system. Most other pensions will continue, but you need to check. Amy and I are both drawing state pensions. I mentioned that we are both former state employees. I have a state pension from Illinois and from Oregon, and she has one from Oregon, and I'm on Social Security, but she's a Sprout and hasn't yet signed up for that. So we're getting all 4 of those directly deposited into an account in Eugene, and we access those monies as we need. Laura mentioned you can use your credit or your debit card anywhere, and we certainly can. We actually prefer to transfer funds into our Bulgarian accounts and expend them from there. But that's because of the exchange rate. The exchange rate fluctuates enough that we want to know how much it's going to cost us to transfer funds. And moving money has become so easy. It has some delay. It can take us, as I mentioned the other day, if we try to transfer money on a Friday, it's likely not to arrive until the following Wednesday. We still have access to our accounts through our debit card, but if you're trying to move money into your accounts in a foreign country, it can take some time.
Jan, there's a question in the chat from Karen. How do you maintain a U.S. physical address? Is it a family member who monitors your mail?
That's a possibility. We decided not to do that because our family members are too unstable and they move. And so you don't want to have to try to, Amy thought that was funny. They move around and you don't want to rely on somebody who might move. There are places like, I don't know that well, we're using iPostal One, Mailboxes, etc. is another company where you just purchase or rent a mailbox, and they will tell you when you receive something. If you'd like them to open it, well, first, if it's just junk, you can say throw it away, and they do. If it's useful to you, they will open it, scan it, and send you an image of it. If it's necessary, they will forward it physically to you. This, by the way, is how RVers do it too. People who drive around in RVs all the time don't have an address, so they use these services as well. So it's a pretty good sized business and it's very effective. But there's an iPostal office right in Ashland. So we have an Ashland home address still on Siskiyou Boulevard. But you would find us there.
And then Roberto asked, what's your favorite financial company to do transfers?
Well, I can tell you about first I'll say we use Revolut. And Revolut lets you, once you get the money into their accounts, it lets you transfer funds among currencies for no fee. So I move US dollars in and tell them I want these to become Bulgarian leva, and they suddenly do, and now I can spend them as Bulgarian leva.
How do you spell that?
Revolut, Revolut.
And then there's another one I've heard a lot about, which is called Wise.
Yes, I was going to mention that. We actually used Wise for transfers a few times, but we didn't open accounts there. But you can open and maintain accounts there as well. So it allows you to transfer. And I know quite a number of people here use Wise. And a third one that we have a guy we've bumped into several times who really, really strongly advocates for Capital One credit card, because the Capital One accounts let you maintain your accounts there. You can have direct deposit and that sort of thing. So you might look into credit card services to do essentially the same thing. He's just really strong advocate for the low cost of that one. Okay, I'm going to go through this slide and then we'll take a quick break. Medicare is a problem for you. If you're counting on Medicare, you've lost it if you move outside the US. It offers no coverage at all whatsoever outside the US. It's nice, though, that when you return to the US, you do get your coverage. You are maintained in the Medicare system, so that if you come back to the US and have a need to go to the hospital or see a doctor, you've got Medicare coverage. If you're going to be coming back on a regular basis, that would be really useful to you. When Amy and I return next July, I have Medicare, she does not. She's not yet old enough. And that means she's going to have to buy travel insurance on the off chance that she might need to go to see a doctor or go to the hospital. I'm not going to describe the penalties to any great extent, but I will tell you, if you leave the US and stop paying on the portions you're buying from Medicare, when you return, there's a 10% per year penalty for the rest of your life. So if you're outside the US for 3 years and don't pay for Medicare Part D, when you return at the end of 3 years, you will pay 30% more for the rest of your life for Medicare. So I'm still paying for Medicare. It's not terribly expensive, but in case I decide to move back, because everybody tells me 2 years is the break point. If you stay 2 years, you'll by then know whether you're going to be willing to stay. And if you don't make it, if you make it to 2 years, chances are you'll like the place and can stay, but you may well not make it. But you do really need to check in to see what's best for you. You need to see what you should do about Medicare if you plan to leave the country. It can cost you a great deal of money if you try to return after a significant stay outside the country. So I'll ask if there are any questions, and if there are not, we'll go to a break, and if there are, we'll try to address the questions.
Let's see. What about if you have Medicare Advantage instead of traditional Medicare? In Baja, they honor Medicare Advantage.
They do. I didn't know that. What you're buying there is an insurance policy through Medicare Advantage. So I'm not terribly surprised that you might have coverage through it, but I wasn't aware that you would have coverage through a Medicare Advantage plan. I didn't purchase that when I was in the US, so I don't have that information.
Jan, going back a little bit, I don't think that England is in the Schengen zone.
Are they not now?
Well, I don't think they've been, but I mean, unless.
Well, that would be really good. That does mean you can move back and forth from the continent to England. It's not in alignment with the European Union, though. So people thought that Brexit would also change that. It doesn't change much of that. So, I mean, there are lots of, Brexit didn't really completely dissolve the relationship between England, Britain, and the countries on the continent. But you can find, if you look up Schengen zones, SCHENGEN zone, you can find a list of the countries that are members.
Somebody posted it in the chat, so.
Oh, they did.
All those
Oh,
countries
good.
are listed there.
Of course, if you're going to Mexico, you don't care about that. So I don't want to get too specific about Europe. If there are no other questions, I'll take 5 minutes and let you have the same. I see something just popped up in the chat, but as I mentioned, it's too small for me to read.
Yeah, Jack said 5 European countries not in the Schengen area are Ireland, Cyprus, Albania, Montenegro, and the United Kingdom.
Okay.
Mark asked, if I decide to stay in the country I move to, are there LTC options? I assume you mean long-term care.
That's entirely dependent on the country. Most countries that have a socialized medicine system, which Bulgaria does, also has a parallel private system. And you would probably be in the private system. In Bulgaria, after I stay 5 years, then I can get into the socialized medicine. I have to buy in. It's not terribly expensive. It's like 15 leva a month to buy into it. So it's pretty cheap. 1 leva is worth 60 cents. So that would be about $12 a month. And it covers everything you might want to do, including dental. So it depends on where you move. They may not even have a long-term care system. One thing I thought was really upsetting, Amy and I have long-term care insurance. It's only good in the US. So if we move into long-term care here, we don't get those funds. What I'm trying to offer you are example things to be concerned about, not answers. If you are going to be moving, I just checked, there are 195 countries in the world. And among those 195, there are 195 different rules for how you might move. So it's really important you think about the country you're going to. What I'm trying to illustrate is what you need to consider as you make the move, but you have to check the particular country. And honestly, we hear about changes all the time in the Bulgarian system for immigration or relocation and retirement. And that's just the one country. So be aware that the country you're interested in may be changing as quickly and as radically as things move forward. So be careful to check and see where things are. So next, I want to talk about moving. Moving is moving whether you're going down the block or internationally. It is darned inconvenient, isn't it? It is not a convenient thing to do. You have to pack stuff or not. We ended up packing 4 boxes, I mentioned, shipping them. Bad idea, just didn't work out. Moving is very tiresome. It is exhausting. Doesn't matter if you're moving locally or across the country or across the world. It is confusing. When you get to a new place, where do you go to get your insurance set up for your car? Where do you go to get your utilities turned on and ready to use? Who manages the utilities? Are they a municipal effort or is it private? There's all kinds of questions. Moving is going to cost you. It costs you even if you're just moving locally. And it's difficult. It is a lot of work. It can be a real challenge to try to make this effort. I have to tell you, honestly, this was one of my easiest moves, and that's going to sound counterintuitive. But because we didn't move stuff to speak of, this was a pretty easy move. I hear a lot of people, last year I particularly heard from my participants in this class, we taught last fall as well, I'm just too old to move. But when I was younger, I worked harder at the move than I did this time. So I want to reassure you that you probably are not. This is not as big a deal as you might think that it is. I will warn you that learning languages gets harder as you get older. That's where the big challenge comes from. If you're going to move, where are you going to move to? What you need to do is identify potential countries of destination. Where might you want to go? Most people identify a single country. Amy and I were pretty sure about Bulgaria, but we looked at an awful lot of other countries as well. As much, I mean, there was some bias involved in that. We were looking to discount Bulgaria. We were looking at other countries to say, well, maybe Portugal would be better. Nope, Portugal isn't better. How about Belize? They at least speak English there. We could go to Belize. Nope, they have really big bugs. There were some real, I mean, it was literally an effort to knock Bulgaria off the list. But I would recommend that you try to be a little open-minded. I know many people are just saying, well, it's this country or nothing. I'm not going to move anywhere else. Make sure you understand why you want to move there. Know what you want. What is it you're trying to accomplish? What is it you're trying to put in place when you get there? Very important you learn more about the places you're going to. People are often just really surprised. You can find an awful lot on the internet. I in fact, just the other day was watching a short video by someone who moved here to Bulgaria from the UK, and she was complaining that she was surprised by the weather. She wished she had known more about the weather. It gets hot here, except when it gets cold. It's what's referred to as a continental climate. It can get to 100 degrees many days in July and August. It's very much Ashland's weather, as a matter of fact, yeah. But it was a shock to her to find that it got as hot as it did, because moving from the UK, the weather's quite mild. She could have known all of that by looking on the internet.
Another good resource is podcasts, which are super helpful because you can actually hear people talking back and forth about, whatever the country is that you're looking to go to. And I'll just put a plug in here again, go visit the places before, if there's something that's on the list, go visit it. Because
Yeah,
even let's say for Mexico, there's a lot of different climates in Mexico. Where the city we're moving to is on the coast. It is humid. It's not a matter of if it's humid, it's a matter of levels of how high the humidity is.
yeah.
And you may not like that. Whereas, more inland places are going to have different climates. So make sure you go and check out all the different reasons you may or may not want to live somewhere.
Yeah, I will tell you, I tell stories so frequently that I never remember when I told them. So I'm going to tell you something I think I might have said last week, but I'm going to say it again if I did. And that is when we went to, I'm sure I did, in fact, when we went to Los Angeles to get our visa, the woman was just shocked that we had been there a dozen times. She really expected me to say, no, I've never visited Bulgaria, but I want to move. And I think we're together, Laura and I will beat this point up pretty good. You really, really need to visit, and you need to visit frequently. I mean, at different times. We honestly have never visited Plovdiv during the summer in advance of moving here. We didn't realize it got quite so hot. But we moved from Ashland, 100 degrees. We've been at the Jackson County Fair when it was 100 degrees. And it sounds better when you're here because it's only 40 degrees. Yeah, you will have to learn another measurement scale to move. Anyway, YouTube videos are out there. Any place you want to visit, any place you want to go, somebody's done a YouTube video about it, I guarantee you. And then there are online groups via Reddit or Facebook. These are really useful. I mentioned it before, Facebook has a bad rep. Reddit, a little less so, but still, it's social media. But that's where you find people who are actually doing what you're thinking about. And you can ask questions and they'll answer. They'll usually give you trouble about it and make you feel small. But isn't it better to feel small than be stupid? I mean, honestly, it's better to have somebody. The interesting thing with posting questions to the Bulgaria groups, most people who move here are from Britain, from the UK. And when you ask questions, it is very likely someone will say, how did you vote on Brexit? And of course, then you have to say, they didn't ask me to vote on Brexit. I was living in the United States at the time, and they just didn't care what my vote would be. But they assume that you're a UK citizen. And if you complain in any way about the issues of living in Bulgaria, then they will go off about Brexit. So, but you can find so much from these Facebook groups. It's so useful. And then, as Laura said, and I'm going to say it again, visit first. And don't visit one place and fall in love with it and then move to another place. My own mother moved from Iowa to Colorado. She had visited Colorado Springs and just loved Colorado Springs. And she moved to Fort Lupton, Colorado, which I don't know if you know those two places. Chances are you've never heard of Fort Lupton. I hadn't until she moved there. Fort Lupton is northeast of Denver. And if you know anything about that area, you're not even in the foothills. You're out on the flat. It's hot, it's dry, it's unappealing. It is not Colorado Springs, which she had fallen in love with, but Colorado Springs was too expensive for her. It's not a good way to do it. Visit the place you want to live. Try it for a while. Airbnb is a cool deal. You can stay in an apartment. So you have an opportunity to cook with local resources. You have an opportunity to watch local television. Hotels often don't have true local television. They have some kind of odd package. An Airbnb, chances are, will have a local television package. So you can experience the place. Honestly, Amy and I did not live in Plovdiv for any extended length of time. We stayed in the hotel, in fact, in which we are now living, because there's one apartment in this hotel. We did, however, spend a week in each of two cities just to make sure we could get by on English. Because while we have every intention of learning Bulgarian, we're 7 months in and we pretty much can have a conversation about what's our language? Yeah, I went to see a doctor today. I walked in and she greeted me with the word Strevete, which means hello. And I responded with Strevete. We have now expended all of my Bulgarian prowess. So we need to switch to English if that's okay. And she switched to English and everything went fine. But I can't give the impression that I can speak Bulgarian, although we did read the menu at a restaurant this afternoon. They gave us the Bulgarian menu and we were able to figure out what we wanted. So, it's practice. I'm going to be putting a link to this resource. I hope, did I just change what you're seeing?
Yes.
Good. I thought I was sharing the screen rather than the application. This is a resource put together by a friend of ours here in Bulgaria. We didn't know her until we moved here. We met her just a few weeks in. Kathy Moore has lived in Mexico for several years, moved to Spain for several years, and then moved to Bulgaria because the folk dancing is better here. That's exactly the reason she decided to move here. But she has this website about how to be a foreigner, and it is, by the way, howtobeaforeigner.com. These are resources to help you leave. And it's very useful. I'll put a link to this on the Moodle page so that you can have access to it. This sort of thing is really useful. The internet has changed the experience. Amy and I, on a regular basis, say we would not have had the same experience had we not had access to the technologies we do. We use video calls to talk to people back home for 2 to 3 hours at a time for free. We use Google Translate to point at pictures and menus and have it translated from whatever the language it is, and sometimes it's not even Bulgarian, to English. We use the internet all the time. And in fact, I brought with me my Google Net, which is a lot like the Amazon Echoes, and you can ask questions of it. We do that a lot here. So technology is your friend in this situation.
And there's a couple of questions in chat.
Sure.
I want to answer the second one first because it's fairly easy to answer, which is Nils asked, how do you find a podcast on moving to the country you're interested in? Just Google it. I've got Google up. I just put in podcasts about living in Australia. And it brought a couple of them up, the Expat Reality Podcast and New Life in Australia. You can put any country in and it's going to tell you what those are. If you're not familiar with podcasts, you have to go get an app, Spotify or something that lets you listen to them, but that's how you find them. And then Mark asked, back to taxes, should I expect to pay local taxes in the country I moved to? And if so, what could those taxes be?
You should be prepared to, but you don't necessarily have to expect to. And I say that because it really depends. What we're offering here is the things you ought to be considering. I can't imagine any one of you is interested in at least in moving to Bulgaria. I just can't imagine it. So me telling you about how things are in Bulgaria, it's actually a nice, it's an example of that doesn't focus anyone on it. If I were talking exclusively about Mexico or Canada, some people would be getting a lot of information and others less. But what I will tell you is that in many countries, they don't tax pension income. Most countries, in fact, don't tax pension income. They assume you're not making much. Why would they want to take some of that away? So that would be to your advantage. And you're just going to have to check into it to know whether a particular country taxes the income you're trying to bring to them or not. If you're going to move to another country, you need to know what you want. Know your why. Why is it you're moving? Amy and I were looking for an adventure. The timing was good for us, but we didn't leave the country because we were hating it or anything like that. We were just looking for something new and exciting. You have to know your needs. Somebody asked about long-term care facilities, that sort of thing. I need healthcare. Amy and I we were walking back. I mentioned I went to the doctor this afternoon, and we were walking back, and Amy says, boy, these Bulgarians must think we go to the doctor all the time. It's just they have to think we're just constantly at the doctor. Well, we're old, but we're also Americans, and we tend to treat ourselves by going to the doctor. Bulgarians don't. And it kind of shows, frankly. Check out whether a place supports your plans.
Um,
Does it meet your why and does it meet your needs? Go ahead.
I was just wondering what you meant that it shows that they don't go to the doctor.
We look at people our age and they look quite a bit older. And it's not a genetic issue. It's that they've had a harder life than we have. So it's commonplace for me to see someone my age and they are not moving around as today I took 12,400 steps. Yesterday it was 14,600. I'm getting out and walking a lot. And at 68, I'm pretty proud of that. That's an accomplishment, I think. But that's because I have made the effort to take care of myself. And it's a challenge for people who've had rougher lives than mine. So they're all very nice people, by the way. Those are mine. But if you'll go ahead and start entering, you can put in up to 3 countries or destinations. I see someone's put in Eastern Europe. If you're having difficulty, please let me know. The size of the words, for instance, Mexico is pretty large. That's because multiple people have added Mexico. It's looking like Mexico might be the winner. Canada's up there, UK. Oh, I apologize. The software makes all the letters small. So even if you type Mexico with a capital M, it got smalled. It's kind of rude. So Portugal, not surprising. Portugal, Spain, Canada, Sweden, and the UK. And of course, as I said, Mexico is big. This is not a surprising pattern, but isn't it interesting how many different places? Australia is on there, England, of course, also part of the UK, New Zealand, Germany, Japan. Boy, Japan has a tough language. I wouldn't want to, I don't envy you that.
I'm going to add a few that are in the chat. Some folks are having trouble, so
okay, good. Thank you.
these in here. Let's see, what do we got? We've got Italy, Poland, Germany, England. It was not letting me put more in. Anyways, in the chat, we've got Germany, England, a couple for Italy, Taiwan, Poland, more for Spain and Portugal.
Yeah, this is really useful because it shows how difficult it would be to tell you how to move to the country you want to move to. Because every one of them is going to have different rules. And in fact, 6 months from now, any one of them could have different rules again. So you're going to need to be up to date on the individual country you're most interested in. Oh, Austria, there's a beautiful place.
I was just there.
And I was going to say, Laura was just there visiting a few weeks ago. So that was just for information, entertainment purposes, but it was useful information to see that there are quite a number. I have a short video I want you to watch. This is a woman named Alina McLeod. Alina is a former model. She actually went to Tokyo for just a few years as a teenager as a model, but she, a few years ago, decided that she wanted to be a travel vlogger, not a blogger. She didn't write about it. She traveled around the world and posted videos to YouTube. And in fact, the first place she visited, just by chance, was Bulgaria. And she started posting videos from Bulgaria. So we've been following her for 3 or 4 years now and watching where she goes. We've lost interest to an extent because she's become very commercial. But anyway, this video addresses questions you need to be asking about moving into a new country. So I've trimmed it a lot, by the way. The full video is about 30 minutes, but this one's not nearly that. So I'm just going to play it quickly. Let me know if you can hear it. I bet you can't. Nothing yet.
Nope. Nope, nothing.
Okay. That's because I need to share the video with audio, don't I, Laura?
You do. Need to share sound from
So
computer.
I have to stop sharing to do that, don't I?
Nope, you don't. Just go
Oh,
down
well,
to,
I already did.
okay.
I don't, huh?
Nope, actually, you'll need to do it either way. Even if you reshare, you're gonna have to go into more and, or, oh, where is it? I got the
Share
media
sound.
one. Yep, share sound.
Let's get into my
How about
wants
now?
list
Yep.
of what I am looking for in a new potential home base. Point number 1, and this one is definitely non-negotiable, and that is that it is safe for solo women travelers. Point number 2, the
Oh, you paused it.
cost
You
cost
paused
of
it again.
living is at least 50% less than in Canada. Point number 3 is a fairly stable government / currency where they're not like changing policies all the time, or there's like a coup happening, or just a lot of chaos within the government. I don't want to move to a country and then just have things be all over the place. Point number 4, I would prefer if taxes could be 15% or less. Point number 5 is no extreme climate risks. Point number 6, you really need to check if your country and the country you are planning to move to have a social security agreement.
Point of information, she's from Canada. That's why she cares about Canada.
Point number 7 is that ideally, I would prefer that this country's immigration process isn't extremely complicated and that leads to permanent residency or citizenship. In my case, what I have to do is usually just apply for a long-term visa, which is what I am doing at this point in time, and then over a period of 5 to 10 years, depending on the country, you may qualify for permanent residency or citizenship. Point number 8 on my list is that I would prefer that English is widely spoken. Point number 9 is I want the ability to open a bank account in my new country. Point number 10 is that I would like to live in a hub city that has a very good airport with a lot of selection of international flights. Point number 11 is that my country of choice has good health care for a reasonable price. Point number 12 is that I would prefer to live in a city that is very walkable and that has very good public transport. Point number 13 is nature, the beauty of nature. Point number 14, and this one is also a given, it has to have fast and reliable internet. And last, but certainly not least, I would prefer that the country that I move to has at least somewhat of an international community and that the locals are actually welcoming of foreigners. I don't want to stick out like a sore thumb, so ideally I would like it if there was at least somewhat of a, immigrant community from wherever else in the world. That is what I am looking for in a potential new home base.
Sorry. As I said, she's from Canada, so her concerns are relative to Canada. Her concerns may not be your concerns. I don't have any concern as to whether the place I moved to was safe for single women. But that's really important to her because she was traveling throughout the world and finding some places just weren't safe or comfortable. But having a list like this is really valuable. She knew exactly what she wanted. And last December, she moved to Sofia, Bulgaria. So see, it is the right place to go. She had been literally all over the world. If you check out her YouTube channel, she has videos from visiting all over the world and decided Sofia, Bulgaria was the right place for her. That doesn't make it right for anybody else in the world. It made it right for her, given her, what was it, 15 different counts. Was anybody else wondering, how's she going to count beyond 10? I was a little concerned about how we were going to get to 11 and 12 and 13. But anyway, putting together a list like that is really, really useful. I had an exercise. I'm afraid I've talked too much. And if you're willing to stay for a while, this actually would be really useful. What's important to you if you move? What is it you would like to do? So we have 11 minutes. How about we give it 7 and see what we can do about just in, I guess it'd be about 5. Well, we're down to 22 people. So 4 groups probably would be about right. Maybe 5. Well, better do 5. And just toss out what might be useful and important to you if you were to move to a country outside of the US. What are your wants? What are your needs? Did anyone want to offer a report on something they thought was an interesting thing that might not have occurred to them?
I'll
Okay.
offer something, because
Sure.
I did offer this in my group, is that the consideration of what the relationship is between the country that you're possibly moving to and its relationship, hopefully good, with the United States.
I think that's probably a very important thing. Bulgaria, for instance, is in NATO and the protection agreement there, but also there's an America for Bulgaria Foundation, which has supported the construction and renovation of quite a number of particularly Roman ruins here. And that indicates a pretty good relationship as well. So I think that's a really good point. Yeah. I do think what Alina offered is a pretty good basis for getting started on your list. I mentioned, and I will reiterate at this point, Amy was looking for places that didn't have really large insects. And that seems petty, but it was very important to her. And if you don't get it on the list, you might overlook it. Belize has big insects, and that was a concern for her. So
Yeah, we do. Where we're going to Mexico, we have a lot of scorpions and things like that. I've heard a lot of stories about people putting on, not that you wear a lot of boots or anything because it's so hot there, but slip on a pair of boots and get stung. So you have to really be careful.
yeah. Yeah, when I lived in New Mexico, they said, don't ever stick your hand in a hole. There's going to be a scorpion in there.
Can you put
So-
the name of the woman in the video in the chat again?
Yeah, I'll put it in there again.
Thanks.
I'll also put it into the Moodle so that it's available to you there. Here endeth the lesson. We have reached the end, and I see we still have some people with us. That's great. Next week, it's pulling it together. What needs to happen to make this real? How did the move go for us? What is Laura doing to plan hers? How are these going to happen for you if you really want to make it happen? We'll talk about costs. We'll talk about getting the visas and timing. And I have a template for making a project plan to make this happen. It had 180 items on it. We trimmed it a bit because some of them were pretty personal. They were just likely to be us and not you. They weren't all that personal. But anyway, thank you all for coming, and I really appreciate it.
How long will your
Thank you.
videos be up?
They'll be up until I take them down, which means probably forever. Last year's were up there until I started posting the new ones this year.
All right, thank you. That's great.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Thank you,
Till
one
next
and
time.
all.
Thank you.